It was one of those long flights that seemed to last an eternity. I was flying from London to Hong Kong, and the plane was cruising through the night sky while most of the passengers were already asleep. I was also trying to doze off, but I've never been one to sleep well on planes. The cabin was in night mode, with dimmed lights and a peaceful silence, interrupted only by the constant hum of the engines. It was around 3 in the morning when I woke up from a light nap. I was seated by the aisle, and as soon as I opened my eyes, I immediately felt that something was off. The plane seemed too quiet, and as I adjusted my vision, I noticed a silhouette standing in the aisle, just a few meters ahead. At first, I thought it was a passenger heading to the bathroom, but something didn't seem right. The figure was completely still, unmoving, and it was hard to make out any details due to the dim lighting. The shape was human, but without much definition. Just a shadow, perhaps someone with a blanket draped over their shoulders. For some reason, it made me uneasy. I watched for a few seconds, expecting the person to move, but nothing happened. The figure remained there, as if it were simply observing the sleeping passengers. I looked around and realized that no one else seemed to notice it. Everything was so calm that I started to think I might be imagining things. Maybe I was still groggy from my interrupted sleep. I didn't want to get up right away, but something inside me couldn't shake off the presence of that shadow. So I waited for a flight attendant. When I finally saw one passing by, I waved her over. She came to me, and I quietly asked, "Excuse me, did you see that person standing in the aisle?" She looked at me, puzzled, and turned to where I was pointing. The aisle was empty. The figure had vanished. "Sir, there's no one in the aisle," she said with a gentle smile, probably thinking I was just disoriented from fatigue. A chill ran down my spine. I knew I had seen something. I thanked the flight attendant and tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, some kind of reflection or shadow cast by something in the cabin. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I saw wasn't normal. I tried to fall back asleep, but a short while later, something woke me again. When I opened my eyes, the shadow was back, standing in the exact same spot, motionless, but now it seemed closer. My muscles froze. Whatever it wasn't an ordinary passenger. It wasn't moving, and the feeling of being watched overwhelmed me. I quickly looked around, but once again, no one seemed to notice. My mind raced for explanations. Maybe it was an optical illusion, or my brain playing tricks due to fatigue. But the silhouette was there, and I knew something was wrong. Suddenly, the figure turned and, without making a sound, disappeared down the aisle toward the back of the plane. I tried to call for the flight attendant again, but there was nothing left to see. The aisle was completely empty, as if nothing had happened. The rest of the flight was pure torment for me. I didn't see the shadow again, but the feeling that something was wrong stayed with me until we landed. When I finally disembarked in Hong Kong, the experience was still fresh in my mind. I told a friend who travels often, and he said it's common for people to see strange things on night flights, especially when they're tired. But to me, that figure wasn't just a simple illusion. To this day, whenever I'm on a night flight, I keep my eyes on the aisle, even when everyone else is asleep. And I always wonder what that shadow really was and why it seemed to be watching all of us. I've never had issues with flying. In fact, I actually enjoy traveling by plane, especially at night. There's something comforting about the constant hum of the engines, the dimmed cabin lights, and the feeling of being isolated from the world below. But after what happened on my last red-eye flight, something changed. What I saw that night still haunts me. It was a long-haul flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo. We were flying over the Pacific Ocean, and it was past 2 in the morning. Most passengers were asleep, the cabin almost completely silent. I was sitting by the window as I always do, occasionally glancing outside, trying to spot stars or the lights of another passing plane. The darkness outside was almost absolute, except for a few blinking lights on the plane's wings. I was tired, but I couldn't sleep, so I started observing the few stars visible through the window glass. That moment of silence and tranquility always calms me. That's when, as I shifted my position, I noticed something strange in the glass. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from inside the cabin, maybe someone getting up or the dim lighting. But as I looked closer, I realized that wasn't the case. There was something else there. The reflection in the glass looked like a dark figure, almost like a shadow. It was subtle, hard to notice at first glance, but it was there. It seemed to be outside the plane, as if hovering in the air, attached to the window. I frowned, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I shifted in my seat, and the reflection seemed to move with me. I knew that wasn't possible. The figure was outside, in the darkness, yet it reflected as though it were inside the cabin. I leaned closer to the window, trying to get a better look, but the figure remained still. It had a humanoid shape, but it was just a shadow with no visible details. My first thought was that my eyes were playing tricks on me. After all, it was late and I was exhausted. But for some reason, it left me deeply unsettled. I kept staring at the reflection, trying to find a logical explanation. Nothing made sense. I looked around at the other passengers. They were all either asleep or engrossed in their movies. No one seemed to notice what I was seeing. Finally, I turned to the man sitting next to me and, feeling a bit embarrassed, asked, "Do you see something strange in the window glass?" He looked at me, clearly confused and groggy, but leaned in to look. For a moment, he just sat there, silently observing. Then, I saw his eyes widen slightly. "What is that?" he muttered. A chill ran down my spine. He saw it too. We both sat there in silence for a while, just staring at that shadow in the glass. It didn't seem to move, but the feeling that something was outside the plane was undeniable. Eventually, the man leaned back and looked at me, clearly uncomfortable. "It must be an illusion," he said, trying to laugh, but the nervousness in his voice was obvious. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe it was just an illusion, a result of exhaustion and the darkness outside. But for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to close the window shade, trying to block it from my view. The rest of the flight was agonizing, and I couldn't sleep, always feeling like something was watching us from outside. When we landed in Tokyo, the man next to me and I exchanged brief glances, but neither of us mentioned what we had seen again. Since that day, I always hesitate before looking out the window on night flights. I don't know what that shadow was, but the feeling that something was out there, so close to us, still unnerves me. I've never been a particularly anxious passenger on flights. I've traveled many times, and like most people, I'm accustomed to the usual sounds of an airplane. But on my last flight, something completely different happened, something that left my nerves on edge. It was a night flight from Sao Paulo to New York. Everything was going smoothly until, in the middle of the night, I woke up from a nap to a strange sound. I was sitting by the window, and the sound was coming from the direction of the plane's wing, right beside where I was seated. It was a soft but persistent noise, something like a rhythmic tapping or scratching, repeating every few seconds. At first, I thought it might be something normal, perhaps part of the wing's mechanics or the landing gear. But the sound began to grow louder and more prominent, enough to make me uncomfortable. I turned to the window and tried to observe the wing, but with the dark night sky and the cabin lights reflecting on the glass, it was almost impossible to see anything outside. The noise persisted, and I started feeling uneasy. It wasn't a sound I had heard before on flights, and it seemed to be getting closer. It wasn't like the usual sounds of an airplane cutting through the air or anything mechanical. It was irregular, as if something was touching or scratching the fuselage in a way that didn't make sense. I tried to ignore it, but the noise wouldn't stop. That's when I decided to call a flight attendant. When she approached, I explained what I was hearing and asked if she could check if something was wrong. She was polite, but her expression suggested she was probably used to nervous passengers reporting strange sounds during flights. She glanced out the window, apparently seeing nothing unusual. "Sir, it's normal to hear some sounds from the outside parts of the plane, especially near the wing. Could be the wind or some natural movement of the aircraft. But I'll check with the crew to see if there's anything that needs attention. Okay?" She walked away, and the sound continued. With each tap or scratch, my heart raced a little faster. I forced myself to stay calm, repeating to myself that she was right, that it must be something normal, that planes make noises all the time. But none of it sounded normal. A few minutes later, the flight attendant returned, smiling reassuringly. She told me there was nothing wrong with the plane. The pilot had also been informed, and he assured that all systems were functioning perfectly. Apparently, it was just a routine noise. I tried to relax with that information, but the sound persisted, and I couldn't ignore it. The flight continued, and the noise lingered. I tried closing my eyes, but every time that sound returned, my body tensed. I spent hours there, unsure of what to do, until, just before dawn, the noise finally stopped. It was as if it had never existed, and the rest of the flight went smoothly until landing. When I disembarked in New York, I was still left with that uncomfortable feeling. Before leaving the plane, I asked one of the maintenance technicians inspecting the aircraft if they had found anything wrong with the wing. He looked at me with a confused expression. "No, sir. Everything is perfectly in order." I thanked him but left with a strange feeling in my stomach. To this day, I don't know what caused that sound. It could have been a loose part, some common flight noise, but something about the irregularity of the sound left me deeply unsettled. Now, every time I sit near the wing, I listen carefully, and sometimes I still think I hear that sound, even when it's not there.